I'm Liz Faublas, and this is Currents. The presidential candidates answer questions of faith, but what do voters know about the religion of the two men? And it was a hit movie. Now a book tells the story of a fight for religious freedom. Plus, a look inside one of Rome's hidden gems. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This month, President Barack Obama and former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney gave the nation a rare personal glimpse of their respective faiths. The candidates discussed their views of their beliefs in public life in the midsummer issue of Cathedral Age magazine. Now, the magazine asked the candidates 8 questions, including how does faith play a role in your life, and what does a political leader's faith tell you about him or her as a person? In answering these questions and others, both candidates reaffirmed their beliefs and spoke about how religion should not be the singular measure of a candidate. President Obama answered by saying, quote, "First and foremost, my Christian faith gives me a perspective and security that I don't think I would have otherwise, that I am loved, that at the end of the day, God is in control." Now, Governor Romney offered, "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of mankind." Perhaps the most important question to ask a person of faith who seeks a political office is whether he or she shares these American values: the equality of humankind, the obligation to serve one another, and a steadfast commitment to liberty. They are not unique to any one denomination, end quote. CNN's Brianna Keeler took a closer look at the unprecedented interview that shed some light about faith on the campaign trail.
Cathedral Age, the magazine put out by the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., with a circulation of just 25,000, nabbed quite the get: President Obama and Governor Mitt Romney talking about their religious beliefs.
You're not a very big publication.
No, we're not. But we are a trusted institution, and I think that's the difference.
The National Cathedral has served a public role in politics, the site of inauguration prayer services and many state funerals. President Bush visited the church after 9/11. Its magazine published the candidates' written answers to 8 questions, including one about the sincerity of their Christian faith. President Obama said, "You know, there's not much I can do about it. I have a job to do as president, and that does not involve convincing folks that my faith in Jesus is legitimate and real." Polls show many voters still believe Obama is Muslim, and many Americans also know little about Mitt Romney's Mormon faith or question if it's really Christianity. Romney addressed that, emphasizing his belief in Jesus Christ. He told Cathedral Age, "Every religion has its own unique doctrines and history. These should not be bases for criticism, but rather a test of our tolerance." Romney, whose church did not allow people of color to be priests until 1978, talked about his family's acceptance of all races. He said, "I was taught in my home to honor God and love my neighbor. My father was committed to Martin Luther King Jr.'s cause of equality, and I saw my parents provide compassionate care to others." The president seemed to take the opportunity to remind readers he is indeed a Christian, saying, "First and foremost, my Christian faith gives me a perspective and security that I don't think I would have otherwise, that I am loved, that at the end of the day, God is in control." Cautiously chosen words on the politically touchy subject of religion.
It has a volatility in this campaign. They have been very wary about approaching it, so they're being careful.
Well, the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life conducted their own research on the candidates' faith, and this one focusing on voters' beliefs on the faith of President Obama and Mitt Romney. I spoke with Carrie Funk, she's senior researcher at Pew, about the data earlier today. Carrie, it would appear overall, looking at the data, that concerns about the candidates' respective faiths are not really a priority for voters.
Yeah, what's really interesting about candidate religion this year is that we have a Mormon presidential candidate for the first time ever on a major party ticket. And in terms of President Obama, while a Protestant, he encounters a sizable minority of voters who misperceive his faith, making the role of religion and voter judgment a little more complex. Of course, when we look further, we're seeing that partisans tend to support their party candidate, and there's not a lot of movement between those two.
And I want to make it clear still, it's not to suggest this survey or anything in the survey that most voters are not placing importance on religious beliefs of a president. I mean, it is still a significant criterion when voters are actually vetting their candidate. Do you agree?
Sure. What's interesting is we find 2/3 of registered voters in the U.S. saying that having a president with strong religious beliefs is important to them. And in fact, Pew Research Center surveys going back to 2000 have found similar portions of the public saying this. So back in 2000 and 2004, 7 in 10 voters said that having a president with strong beliefs, religious beliefs, is important to them. So that has long been a criterion, and it seems, and people say it's important.
Let's dig a little deeper into the numbers. Data shows that Romney's Mormon faith is not lost on the majority. There's 60%, they know he is Mormon, and that hasn't even changed since the last time you took a poll during the GOP primaries. Why do you think this is important?
Right. Well, as you know, about 1% of the general public are Mormons, so it's not a particularly well-known religion. And we haven't had a presidential candidate from a major party ticket as a Mormon in the past, so we're interested in whether or not it makes a difference. So if you look at those who are aware of Romney's Mormon faith, we find that a majority say that they're comfortable with his religion, and another 2 in 10 say that that religion doesn't matter to them one way or another. But that leaves about 2 in 10 saying they're uncomfortable with his faith.
Mm-hmm.
White evangelical, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, who's more uncomfortable? White evangelical Protestants tend to be more likely than other religious groups to say they're uncomfortable with Romney's faith. But most white evangelicals who are aware that Romney's a Mormon say they're comfortable with his faith.
And that, again, that seems to be part of a consensus, too. And, Carrie, I want to definitely keep this balanced. What does research say about how voters are reacting to President Obama's faith?
Sure. Views of President Obama's religion are quite different. About half of registered voters correctly identify him as a Christian. 3 in 10 are unsure of his faith, and 17% falsely identify him as a Muslim. That figure has gone up a little bit since 2008 with the growth in people falsely identifying him as a Muslim being most pronounced among conservative Republicans. Now, what's important there is that when it comes to comfort with Obama's faith, voters who know that Obama is a Christian are overwhelmingly comfortable with his faith. About 8 in 10 are comfortable, while a majority of those who say he's a Muslim are uncomfortable.
And Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, always doing this research, always gathering data. I'm interested to know, are you in the process of collecting information now to determine the effect of adding Paul Ryan to the ticket and how that may affect Romney's appeal ahead of the election?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's interesting about the vice presidential candidates is that both are Catholic. And, of course, what's difficult to tease apart is that when you vote on Election Day, you're voting for a ticket, not for president separately from vice president. So it's sometimes hard to pull apart the effect of one person versus another.
You know, a separate Pew research released about a month ago found that voters have very little interest in learning more about Romney's religious beliefs. Now, in your experience conducting this research, have you ever found that opinions like the ones that you highlighted, in this case Mitt Romney's or even President Obama's faith, change radically the closer we get to Election Day?
I mean, what happens is one of the reasons why we're constantly conducting polls is that we're always aware there's potential for change over the course of the election. And in fact, historically, one of the big mistakes of the polling world is when they stop polling too soon ahead of the time. And so we're always sensitive to the possibility that real changes in the campaign will change people's attitudes and feelings towards the candidates.
All right, Carrie, we're going to have to leave it there. As we know, with opinions and elections, so much is subject to change and anything can happen. So we shall see in November. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And stay tuned. There's more currents after the break. The rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. God and guns for Republican vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan. During a campaign stop in Pennsylvania on Wednesday, Ryan referenced a remark made by then candidate Barack Obama during the 2008 campaign.
Remember this other time where he was caught on video saying, people like to cling to their guns and their religion. Hey, I'm a Catholic deer hunter. I am happy to be clinging to my guns and my religion.
Meanwhile, the Catholic Hispanic Leadership Alliance has released a 2012 voting guide. The document evaluates President Obama and Mitt Romney on 23 key issues, including abortion, marriage, and the federal contraception mandate. The alliance gave President Obama a score of 17.4% and Mitt Romney a score of 52.2%. The Leadership Alliance's president says the report draws from the U.S. Bishop's statement, quote, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, which was released ahead of the 2008 presidential election. A conservative law firm is weighing on a suit involving the September 11th cross. The lawsuit by the group American Atheists aims to keep an iconic cross made from steel beams from the World Trade Center out of the September 11th museum. The atheist group claims that including the cross in a museum on public property is exclusionary to non-Christian Americans and a, quote, blatant violation of the First Amendment. The American Center for Law and Justice filed a brief on behalf of the two defendants in the case, the National September 11th Memorial and Museum Foundation and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The center's chief counsel, Jay Sekulow, has called the arguments by the atheist organization offensive and absurd. He says more than 190,000 people have signed a petition opposing the lawsuit. Meanwhile, a new report shows hostility towards religion in the U.S. has grown to unprecedented levels. This week, the heads of the Liberty Institute and the Family Research Council announced the release of data that documents more than 600 recent examples of religious hostility. The report's findings were based on recent court cases. In one case, seminaries in Texas were required to get state approval of their curriculum, board members, and professors. In another case, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs banned funerals at national cemeteries from including religious content, even if it went against the desires of the family of the deceased. To Philadelphia now, where the Archdiocese there has created a new system for its high schools. Archbishop Charles Chaput unveiled the details of the new system on Tuesday. It will serve the Archdiocese high schools and special education programs and will be run by an independent Catholic foundation. The Archdiocese will also be teaming up with Faith in the Future Foundation to renew the Archdiocesan School. Now, earlier this year, a Blue Ribbon Commission recommended the closure of several schools in the Philadelphia Archdiocese. Wednesday's feast of the Queenship of Mary was the topic of Pope Benedict's weekly general audience. Rome Reports has more.
The Pope led Wednesday's general audience by talking about the Blessed Virgin Mary, since today the Church celebrates her queenship. It's a celebration that became official back in 1954 under Pius XII.
È stata collocata a 8 giorni alla solennità dell'Assunzione per sottolineare lo stretto legame tra la regalità di Maria e la sua glorificazione in anima e corpo accanto al suo figlio.
Benedict XVI explained that Mary and Jesus share their throne, but it's a throne that's not based on riches, but on humanity.
C'è un'idea volgare di re o regina che sarebbe una persona con potere e ricchezza, ma questo non è il tipo di regalità di Gesù e di Maria. Pensiamo al Signore. La regalità, il essere di Cristo, è intessuto di umiltà, di servizio e di amore.
He then called on pilgrims to have faith in the Virgin Mary by praying to her.
May the prayers of Our Lady guide us along our pilgrimage of faith, that we may share in her Son's victory and reign with him in his eternal kingdom.
Towards the end of the general audience, a group of nuns sang a song to the Pope.
Grazie.
And Chicago Archbishop Cardinal Francis George is asking for prayers following news that doctors discovered cancerous cells in his kidney and liver. According to the Archdiocese of Chicago, Cardinal George rested at home this past weekend and did handle a number of his administrative responsibilities. The Cardinal will meet with doctors to discuss a plan for his treatment. He has asked for prayers for all those affected by cancer and for doctors and medical staff that work with patients and their families. It's the second time Cardinal George has been diagnosed with cancer. In In 2006, he had major surgery for bladder cancer. He has been the Archbishop of Chicago since 1997 and submitted his resignation to Pope Benedict earlier this year upon reaching the mandatory retirement age of 75. The Pope has not yet announced that he has accepted that resignation. Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. Coming up, a companion book to the hit movie about a fight for religious freedom. Welcome back. It's a movie that boasts a star-studded cast that included Andy Garcia, Eva Longoria, and Peter O'Toole. For Greater Glory told the true story of the 1920s Cristero War, a people's revolt against the anti-Catholicism of the Mexican government that was in power at the time. Los Angeles Archbishop Jose Gomez praised the film, calling it, quote, a top-flight production whose message of the importance of religious freedom has a particular resonance for us today. Well, on September 11th, For Greater Glory will be released on DVD and Blu-ray. And a man who was considered an expert on the persecution of the Catholic Church in Mexico in the 1920s has written a companion to the movie. Ruben Quezada is director of the Catholic Resource Center and St. Joseph Communications in Southern California, and I had a chance to talk with him recently about his book. Ruben, you were introduced to the story of Blessed Miguel Pro at an early age. Now, what encouraged you to learn more about him, and how did he inspire you?
Well, what interested me the most was knowing, you know, I myself coming from Mexico, I lived there for the first 10 years of my life, and of course I was kind of raised and grew up at a Jesuit retreat house. That's where I worked when I was a child. It really, I guess, it struck a nerve when one of the priests introduced me for the first time to Blessed Miguel Pro and telling me that he was executed for being a priest, and it really didn't make sense to me at the time because, you know, Mexico being such a Catholic country, how could something like that could happen? And the priest who introduced me for the first time, you know, to Blessed Miguel Pro, he gave me that little prayer card that he had with him, and he says, you should learn about him. He says, you should learn about this war that the government waged upon Catholics, he says, and one of them was ours, he says, the Jesuit. So that really kind of sunk in, you know, and, you know, back then there was not much research. Of course, there was no internet, so it took me a while to start reading more about this priest, and it wasn't until I found a couple of books that are, you know, they're no longer in print, when I first saw the images of his execution, and it just, I mean, it floored me, knowing that I had never heard about this part of history in Mexico, you know, even when I went to school in Mexico. So the more I delved into this, even into the history books in Mexico, I was amazed that I couldn't find anything. And that's where my interest just grew. I says, wait a minute, what's going on?
What is this all about, huh?
Yeah.
Well, so talk to us a little bit about the Cristeros and how does their experience relate to the state of Catholicism today? Because that's how we're tying this all together, and that's what makes this even more timely and interesting.
It is, you know, the role is so crucial in so many ways that, you know, whenever I've been giving this this presentation for so many years, so about 10 years now, that many people don't grasp the importance and the significance of this, how these Catholics rose up against this government who was trying to eradicate the faith, Catholicism, from Mexico. But you know, they were doing it, of course, for the faith, and for Holy Mother Church. But overall, it was just such a greater impact that many people do not realize. Because I mean, the more I did the research, it just opened up my eyes to the reality of this of this persecution. But again, go ahead.
And Ruben, why did the Mexican government do their best to ruthlessly persecute Catholics, to carry out this enforcement of the 1917 anti-clerical provision? Like, why did they go so far?
Well, you know, it was the leadership in itself, you know, has been controlled by, you know, Masons. You know, Masonry has been hand in hand pretty much with Mexico's presidency for decades. And so, you know, when after this revolution ended in 1917, and these articles were written into Mexico's constitution, well, they were not enforced at first, but they were set there in place for future use. And so when this President Calles came into power in 1924, again, you have to read a little bit about his background. You know, he was raised not just non-Catholic. He was raised an atheist and anti-Catholic too. So his his upbringing had a lot to do with his attack eventually when he came into power, and that's something that, of course, it is so important for us to know the importance of rearing our children with good Christian principles and belief in God and of course respect, and especially for religious freedom. So Caius was raised in a very anti-Catholic household.
And Ruben, in the time we have left, I also want to remind our audience that there were attempts initially at a peaceful resolution, but that failed. And I found myself shocked that a priest could even, quote, wage war or support an armed uprising, and wondered, what did the Pope do to support the church in Mexico at the time?
Very good. Yeah. Well, two things real quick. I got to say, priests are not allowed. They're not supposed to raise up in arms. That just goes contrary, and then that would be pretty much almost immediate excommunication, just because they are not. That's just something that the church does not allow, and that's our principles. The church would never permit that, nor does it support any type of war unless it is justified, as a just war theory. And that's very limited. There are some paragraphs in the Catechism about that, which are included in the book. But what was the Pope doing? Well, first of all, the first thing that the Pope, with the assistance of the Mexican bishops, was to give permission to suspend all Catholic worship. And the reason that took place was because if they didn't suspend worship on the same night that the law was going to go into effect, there would have been a lot more confrontations a lot earlier, and there would have been a lot of bloodshed, because Catholics would have defended their little churches, and no matter the cost. So to avoid any maybe early bloodshed, the Vatican gave the bishops to suspend all Catholic worship in order to avoid any bloody confrontation. So that was the first, and of course there was many calls to Congress, to the president, to rescind this law, to be able to lift this law, because for many weeks, for months at a time, there was just no Catholic celebrations, no masses, and the Vatican tried over and over again, and each time they were denied, they were rejected, and not even that, they also the Mexican government cut all diplomatic ties to the Vatican and kicked cut ties and asked the Vatican to leave. So, everything they could have done, and then they sent, of course, in the middle of this persecution, Pope Pius XI sent an encyclical to Mexico, to its citizens, priests, and whoever was being persecuted, on this great encyclical called Iniquis Afflictisque, which is in persecution of the church, and that's included in the book that we have prepared as well. So they were doing everything they could within their power, and of course, prayers, phone calls to try to get this law lifted, and so forth. They were trying everything they could.
Flashes of history repeating itself as we take a look at what's happening today. Ruben, thank you so much. The book is called For Greater Glory, The True Story of Cristiada, and it's a powerful look at the lengths that the faithful will go through to protect religious liberty. I really appreciate your being with us today. And next week, we will bring you an interview with one of the actors from For Greater Glory, so be sure to tune in for that. Don't go anywhere. There's more Currents ahead. When we return, a look inside the house that the founder of the Jesuits once called home. Finally tonight, visitors to Rome who want to get a sense of the history of the Catholic Church generally flock to any number of locations. There's St. Peter's Basilica inside the walls of Vatican City, the place where most papal events are held. There are also the other 3 papal basilicas, including the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, the cathedral church for the Diocese of Rome. But Rome Reports takes us inside a less known but no less historic location in the Eternal City.
The Church of the Gesù in Rome receives hundreds of tourists every day that come to see the tomb of St. Ignatius of Loyola. But few actually know that directly next to the church is the house where the founder of the Jesuits used to live. It was the first house of the Society of Jesus, located near the old Venetian palace, which used to be the home of the Pope at that time. When the Tiber River in Rome flooded in 1598, only 4 rooms in the house were not ruined. Today, its hallways are home to the artwork of the painter Andrea Pozzo. Scenes depict some of the miracles attributed to St. Ignatius.
Lo que se conservó fueron las
The 4 original rooms are conserved where St. Ignatius lived the last 17 years of his life and where he died. There also lived the 4 successor generals of the order. At that time, there was a development of the foundation for the Society of Jesus. In these simple rooms is where St. Ignatius wrote the constitutions of the Society of Jesus, as well as more than 7,000 letters with his signature and the seal of the Superior General. They also have some of the original furniture and a copy of Our Lady of Writing located on the desk. Visitors can see how they would have measured up next to the saint by standing next to a life-size statue of him. The house also has some of his more personal effects, such as clothing, shoes, and the rules of the order he composed in 1549. This small chapel is still in use. It boasts original flooring and a table some 500 years old that also belonged to St. Ignatius. In the room which wasn't his, but where St. Ignatius died, is used as a chapel today. We have a picture of the Holy Family from the time of St. Ignatius, in front of where he would celebrate the Eucharist every day. This is the room where the founder of the Jesuits was taken care of until his death on July 31st, 1556. Despite the years, the home continues to bring surprises. In 1991, on the 500th anniversary of his birth, during a restoration, a fresco was uncovered with the initials IHS, the Greek abbreviation for Jesus, which is one of the hallmarks of the Society of Jesus.
And that is all for tonight. Be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net, and you can also follow us on Twitter and connect with us on Facebook. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faubles. We leave you tonight with some scenes of summer in the Italian town of Castel Gandolfo from Pope Benedict's general audience on Wednesday. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.